Today, June the 18th, 2015, marks the 200th anniversary of one of the most famous battles in all of military history, Waterloo. The defeat of the Napoleonic French by the Anglo-Prussian allies of the Seventh Coalition marked the final destruction of the ogre that had been menacing the states of Europe for the past decade. The campaign preceding the battle was a swift one by Napoleonic standards. Following his defeat at the hands of the Sixth Coalition, Napoleon had been exiled to the island of Elba, but after 9 months in exile, watching the political upheaval that racked mainland Europe, he judged the time was right to return. Upon arrival in France on the 1st of March, Napoleon was able to swiftly gather loyal men to him. Dissatisfied veterans of his Grand Armée were quick to retake their arms, and in the famous 100 Days, the numbers that joined him granted the Emperor a formidable army. The great powers at the Congress of Vienna were quick to name Napoleon an outlaw. No other state would recognize the legitimacy of his rule, and by the 13th of March the Seventh Coalition had been formed with the sole goal of removing him from rule. The coalition leaders were quick to begin raising forces, but given that Napoleon's exile had seemed to be the end of the matter, many experienced regiments had been disbanded or redeployed to other parts of the world, and thus many of the forces that were to take the field were a mixed bag in terms of dependability. Nonetheless, by the time hostilities reached a pitch, the coalition forces outnumbered Napoleon by more than 4 to 1. The Battle of Waterloo itself was preceded by several engagements, with Napoleon's rapid advance surprising Wellesley. On June the 15th, French forces had knocked back several coalition outposts by the town of Charleroi, allowing Napoleon to push between the Anglo-Allied and Prussian armies. A bitter engagement at Quatre Bras saw the Anglo-Allied forces hold off Marshal Ney's attack, but the French under Napoleon's direct command were able to push back the Prussians at Ligny. It was this situation that saw Wellington withdraw to consolidate his forces by the Belgian village of Waterloo. The battle that ensued was closely fought, with both sides gaining, losing, and retaking vital positions. Yet for all the epic scale of the engagement, there was little in the way of strategic brilliance or revolutionary tactics. The Anglo-Allied forces' main objective was simply to hold their position in the face of French assaults that were already badly hampered by the wet ground. Both sides saw disastrous use of cavalry lead to unnecessary losses, whilst the French infantry persisted in their habit of attacking in column formation, leading to Wellesley's dry observation that they came on in the same old way, and we saw them off in the same old way. Interestingly, Napoleon did not take any tactical command in the battle, merely observing and sending orders by runner. By contrast, the Duke of Wellington kept himself in the thick of the action, constantly riding to where the fighting was heaviest to give orders, observe the flow of battle, and crucially to inspire his men. His exploits in the battle, from near misses with cannonballs to escaping the pursuit of French lancers, are almost unbelievable in their derring-do, and did much to steady his men. The timely arrival of Prince Blucher's Prussian army was enough to finally break the French, whose forces rapidly disintegrated as the coalition forces began to encircle the entire battlefield. Even the vaunted French Guard regiments, whose earlier advances had so threatened the British positions, were not able to withstand the eventual rout. 4 days after his defeat, Napoleon abdicated the throne of Imperial France, and after evading Prussian capture for several weeks, was taken into British custody on the 15th of July, 1815. The Battle of Waterloo saw a final end to the upheavals of the French Revolution, and ushered in a period of peace in Europe that was almost unprecedented in its length. Indeed, from 1815 until the outbreak of the Great War almost a century later, there would only be one major European conflict, the Russian, or Crimean, War. This period of peace and economic prosperity is known as the Pax Britannica, for the defeat of France had seen the removal of Britain's only major rival for the position of the greatest power on the globe. From the outset of the French Revolution, the British Empire had exploited the crisis to expand its holdings. As France collapsed, they were able to consolidate their holdings in India and remove the French presence altogether. As Napoleon rose to power and began his conquest of mainland Europe, the British had been quick to snap up the colonies of those nations unfortunate enough to come under the French heel, particularly the profitable Spanish and Dutch empires. As this contemporary cartoon will show, this state of affairs was not lost on the rest of the world. The British abolition of slavery had also occurred throughout this period. The age-old institution of human subjugation was finally brought to an end by the British Parliament in 1807, majorly impacting many global economies. It is worth noting that this was not an easy or cheap endeavour for the British either, who adopted the position of global police to end the trade, but did aid greatly in their rise to dominance. The defeat of France saw several other changes in the global power structure as well. Belgium was established as a country, for example, whilst Prussia and Austria expanded their influence considerably, as did the Russian Empire. Perhaps of greatest interest, however, is the final Congress of Vienna. Initially interrupted by Napoleon's re-emergence, the Congress formulated its final act 4 days before Waterloo to establish a means of preventing another war of such awful scope occurring in Europe. It was the Congress that redrew the national borders to limit the breadth of French influence and expand the defences of her neighbours. The Congress was the first in a series of negotiations that became known as the Concert of Europe, the intent of which was to settle disputes through negotiation rather than conflict. Much has been written about how significant this approach was, but the aforementioned period of relative peace and prosperity cannot be overlooked. This was a real attempt to avoid war through balance of power, and had some notable successes in this role. Indeed, the concert was only to finally fail when the rise of Germany under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck saw a return to an alliance system of international relations. For 99 years after the Battle of Waterloo, Europe avoided the horrors of a major war, and the memories must have been faint indeed when it finally embarked upon its next one. It is a sad end note that the peace bought at Waterloo only reached its end when the victorious Allies took up arms against one another.